Hey everybody, so today we're at a little museum.
More history coming at you.
Yep. And we've been kind of on the path of Davy Crockett for a while now, so
Who doesn't love Davy Crockett and the Crockett legacy? That's what we were raised by,
yep.
watching Johnny Appleseed, Davy Crockett, all the cartoons and the old-timey shows.
Yep. So this is Crockett's Tavern. So
we're going to find out the history of the legacy of the Crocketts.
Yep.
And the different videos that we've made in the past have their
how they all piece together and so forth. So anyway, follow us. So quick little look at the outside of the tavern. It's pretty cool. And they do have a marker here that here stood the Crockett Tavern, established and operated by John and Rebecca Crockett, the parents of Davy Crockett. It was the boyhood home of this pioneer and political leader of Tennessee, who was later a victim of the Alamo Massacre at San Antonio, Texas.
Tavern Museum. My name is Christina, and I'm going to give you just a little brief overview about Davy's life, and then we'll start talking about the items here in this room. So a couple of things up front. If you are a big fan of the films, I'm going to burst one of your bubbles right off the bat.
No.
So, I get some people, they are diehard Walt Disney lovers, and I love the films too, but as I tell people, he is not born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. And when Davy Crockett was born, it was August 17th, 1786. He is the sixth of 9 children to John and Rebecca Crockett. And it was during a 4-year window when this northeast portion of our state had broken away from North Carolina and become called the state of Franklin. So if you ever hear about the lost state of Franklin or the battle for the state of Franklin, this is the time window that I'm talking to, which is from 1784 to 1788. Davy is born right in the middle of the state of Franklin years. So as I tell people, he's a Franklinite by birth. When he moves here to Morristown at age 10, right around 1795-96 time period, that's when we officially joined the Union as the 16th state of Tennessee in 1796. So he's got to wait till he's a 10-year-old, but it just doesn't rhyme that he killed him a bar when he was only 3. Sorry. And the reason why I say that is we have a bearskin rug in the next room that you'll get to see. And if I don't say this disclaimer up front, somebody always asks me that question: is that the bar he killed when he was 3? And I told him, nope, sorry. If he could hold one of the rifles that you're going to get to hold in just a minute in the next room, kill anything with it at age 3, let alone a big bear, I can assure you it's not going to be a rug in our next room. It'll be in a Crockett family vault somewhere, or the Smithsonian somewhere. So we'll get to see that in just a minute. So Davy, like I mentioned before, is actually born between 2 mountain ridges. So the Clinch Mountains and the Smokies, or the Appalachian Mountains. So he's in the valley portion of the state. His birthplace, they do have a state park dedicated to that, since you guys are from
we've
Greenville.
been there.
I was going to say, yep, if you haven't, I highly suggest that too, because that chronicles about the first 4 or 5 years of his life. From there, his family moves, trying to establish a grist mill on the banks of the Nolichucky near the North Carolina border in Cove Creek. And what happens is, about the time they move in, get this grist mill up and going, a flood hits the valley and it washes away everything, their home and their grist mill operation, and they are now struggling for a period of several years to get a new foothold for a new business. And Davy's father, John, is now having to take loan after loan to keep the family supported and up and going. So they settle here in Morristown to establish the tavern. And the tavern is not what we equate it with today, with just the drinking part. It was a restaurant, meets a hotel, meets a bar for traveling businessmen, merchantmen, cattle drovers, politicians, anybody using what was then known as the old stage road could stop here, get a respite from the road, and then continue about their business. Now, when we go outside in just a few minutes, the railroad track that you're going to see still follows that main spur, the stagecoach that used to run through here today. That's one of the main stagecoach roads. A couple blocks up at Highway 11E, that's another spur of another stagecoach road. So these taverns would be located about every 10 to 15 miles. This spur going into Abington, Bristol, Virginia to hook up to the main transportation routes going up and down the eastern seaboard. Apologize for that. Yeah, can compete with a tractor going down the road. So I'm like, okay, I can talk loud, but not that loud.
Well, I think we were even where they had tried to set up the grist mill and it was flooded.
Yes.
That's because it's not too far from our house.
Right.
Right.
Yes. So, yeah, and they've just delineated that with the state marker recently because it's such an important stopping point. As I say, it's literally the stepping stone. We've got one of the grist mill stones recovered from that flood that you'll get to see in just a minute. So I say it's the stepping point for why they came to Morristown to build the tavern. Now, the Crockett's are so poor, in fact, they can't even afford the land on which this tavern is built. And we are a reproduction of Davy's boyhood home. Unfortunately, the original structure we lost to a fire because it was originally used as a smallpox hospital during the Civil War. So they had to burn it completely down to stop the spread of disease into the community. So everything we used to rebuild this in the 1950s came from area schoolhouses, log cabins, mercantile shops, all dating right around early 1800 to about 1850, 1860. So this is all refurbished, repurposed wood to give you that feel of what a tavern would have been like. And it was all a home business too. So this was, you lived here and you worked here. So they spearheaded it long before the pandemic days when you worked from home. So they were sort of pioneers in that venture too. This is a home run or homespun run. There we go, I'll rhyme it as best I can. Homegrown business, there we go. I was like, okay, let my words filter in there a little bit. And Davy would have been here assisting as needed, either out dealing with maybe livestock brought in to corral them, give them feed. He might be out assisting with the buildings, garden. He might be out hunting, fishing, whatever needed to be done, he would have to do. And he's here until about age 12 because he didn't like to go to school. His schoolhouse is still standing. It's in private ownership right now, about 5 miles down the road in the Russellville community. And so most of the time he played hooky rather than go to school. And then for the 4 days he did actually show up, he would get in a fight with a bully, and his daddy on all those occasions would whip him and try to make him behave. So when he's 12, he gets in a huge fight with the bully there, and he knows the whipping's going to come shortly thereafter. So instead of facing that, he goes off with an older brother in the neighboring wilderness and flees for many months doing odd and end jobs rather than come home and face the whipping that he was going to get.
At age 12.
At age 12, yes. And so when he finally does come back home, his dad is fed up trying to make him behave and all these whippings to make him go to school. So his father, in the meantime, like I said, is taking loan after loan to keep this up and going. Now they're paying torrential rent to keep this building going on the property. And so he knows, I need help, I need support. And if Davy's not going to go to school, he's going to work. And so he hires Davy out into a form of indentured servitude, and he is gone for 4 years. And he makes his way up to right outside of Baltimore, doing a variety of contracted work for both himself and his father to help support and keep this up and going. And at age 16, he makes his way back here. He gets the last 6 months of his formal education with the landowner and his family, works off the last debts he still owes, and then at age 18, he takes off to the neighboring Jefferson County, and that's where he meets his first wife, Polly Finley, at a social gathering. After a 2-year courtship, they marry 1 day shy of his 20th birthday in 1806. And they start, as they say, you know, the adage, go west, young man. That is Davy Crockett. He goes west, he doesn't look back at this point. So he and his wife, they start moving their way to right outside the Alabama border, and in the space of 6 years, they have 3 children. So he jokes about this time period, but the only thing he was good at increasing was his family, not his fortune. The eldest of his 3 children is the one that's pictured above the desk. That is John Wesley Crockett. John Wesley is the one that picks up the political mantle from his father, and he wins back the seat that Davy lost in 1835. That was sort of the emphasis for why Davy would go out to Texas. They say out of all of his children, he's the one that resembles Davy the most, from those piercing blue eyes and dark hair that Davy was known to have throughout his life. So the family settles right outside of the Beans Creek, Alabama area, and that's when the War of 1812 breaks out. Davy enlists for 3 years fighting the Creek Wars down in Alabama, Spanish Florida area under the generalship of Andrew Jackson, first as a scout and then rising to the rank of sergeant. After 3 years, he makes his way back to Tennessee, but the reunion with his wife and his children is short-lived because his wife Polly dies. And we're not exactly sure what the cause of death was, but he has to be a provider now for his 3 motherless children, and he has to find a mother for those children. So he quickly gets remarried to a neighboring widow named Elizabeth Patton, and she was a widow with 2 children of her own, and then together they have 3 more children. So 6 children, 2 stepchildren, and in just a moment when we go to the bedroom, I'll talk about Congressman Crockett, because that really occurs during the second marriage. So we'll pick up from there. As Paul Harvey would say, I'll give you the rest of Davy's story in just a minute. So this would be where everybody would get respite off the road. They gamble, they play checkers. If you notice our board over here with the corn cob pieces. So you use corn here every which way, shape, form, fashion. Right down to your playing pieces, and then also make this was also going as far outside as your outhouse too, with your pre-Charmin days, and I'll just let you use your imagination at that. Actually had reference to that on the radio today. I was like, oh lordy, I know, and I work with this stuff all day long. So anyway, but this is where they would get the respite from the road while they wait for a meal if they decide to eat here. I will tell you that out of all of the cost here, for staying here, that your lunch or your dinner would be the most expensive meal, because in places like this, if you notice the fireplaces, you're only going to be doing 1 main meal a day because you're heating up the house, and you run the risk too of fire developing inside your structure. Some kitchens, if you go to other places, you'll notice them as an outbuilding, and that's to reduce the risk of fire and cut down the heat in throughout your whole structure. Some of these will be connected with an L, like a long hallway that you could open and close various doors at times to keep out the heat or let heat in as you needed to. But for the most part, especially in summertime, you'd be doing your cooking outdoors. So if you've ever heard the expression of red hot mama, it's not the looser connotation that we know today. It comes from using these fireplaces and burning up all day long. So that's the reason why your dinner is going to be your most expensive meal a day. And this is not a leisurely sit down and take all day, extravaganza like we get in a restaurant. Because as they say, people are working, you got to quickly grab something to eat and then get back out and work again. And so your later meals, like your supper and your breakfast, will be a little bit cheaper, because the supper is more of a leftover, a cold type of supper. You just grab a few things, get you a light, substantial meal, and then you continue to work. Same thing with breakfast. You grab a few items that's a little bit easier to get from your barn there. You get some eggs and get some bacon from your smokehouse and some ham, and then you quickly scrap together a light breakfast and start working. And again, it's not offered to you. So there you go, you get an idea. Yeah. Now I will tell you, the average working man, if you're an artisan at the time, was about $1 a day. Average working man, basic common labor, was about 70 cents a day. So this gives you comparison. When you look at the prices, you think, oh, that's cheap. No, it really wasn't. Now, when I talked about the Crockett family wine, here it is.
Recipe for the John Crockett family wine.
That's cool. And I've tried to make wine before. Well, I actually have succeeded on my 3rd attempt, but it was dandelion wine.
Ah, yep.
And it was
Now-
very expensive because of the cost of sugar.
Yes, exactly. So this one called for 2 pounds of sugar. So you can imagine how expensive it's going to be. And the funny thing about this recipe, I always like reading it, and it talks about you gotta wait for your grapes to stop hissing at you before you start the process of bottling it up. So allowing that natural fermentation, but the proper term, hissing. Gotta wait for it to
The
quit
proper
hissing.
term.
Yep.
Yeah, according to it's not going to serve anybody anything that's breakable. So that's the reason why you see an abundance of wooden plates, tin plates, and the like. Because if they're drunk or they get a little bit too rowdy, you got them rowdy kids hanging around, and they knock something over, that's not going to break. Versus the breakable stuff that's in her hut.
Was pewter popular in
Yes.
the 1790s?
Yes, pewter, and that's what actually the spoons that are hanging up, they are reproduction pewter. And the reason why I don't suggest touching those, I tell people don't touch them, is because they are a mixture of mostly lead and silver. There's a few other components, but that's the two. And because of the lead content, for public health reasons, I'm like, yeah, you can look at that, but I don't suggest touching it. The metal of the home.
Oh, honey, this is
So
great.
this is a correct kitchen fireplace, as I tell people. So here you got the proper hinges and also the brick inlay on the floor that stops the spread of fire into the room. Now to finish with Davy's story, as we say, Paul Harvey says, here's the rest of his life story for you. With his second wife, Elizabeth, the family moves to Rutherford County. They go west again. And that's where Davy starts to settle. He starts developing a few business ideas. He at one point tries his hand. One of his business ventures was to get into grist milling, just like his father. And just like his father, he got his washed away in a flood too. So Crockett's and grist mills just don't mix. They shouldn't even try it. But they settled long enough in the Rutherford area, Lawrence, I'll backtrack here, Rutherford County, that people like him, respect him. He gets a good following in the community, and he decides to enter politics to help them out, to make their lives better. And so they elect him to several local positions, including county commissioner, justice of the peace. He's headed their local militia at one point. Then from there, he springboards to 2 terms as a state assemblyman, and then from there to 3 terms as a United States congressman. Now, his leanings at the time was with the Democratic Party. That was the Tennessee Democratic. They were a Democratic stronghold. Jackson, who was president at the time, was also Democrat. That's your party of Jefferson, the common man's party. And so Davy is wrangling with Jackson quite a bit. They wrangled during the War of 1812. This continues. There's no love lost between these two. And this is especially true over the passage of the Indian Removal Act, which, if you know that, takes the Cherokee out of the mountains of North Carolina on the Trail of Tears, where several thousand of them die along the way toward the reservations in Oklahoma. Davy is very, very opposed to this, and he breaks with his party. He breaks with the political pressure he's facing from Jackson and his constituents, and votes against that act. So when he goes up for his first bid as for a 3rd term, he is voted out of office. He then switches parties to the up-and-coming Whig Party, which is today's Republican Party. And he goes out, he has his own play produced, The Lion of the West, which is sort of, if you've seen the Billy Bob Thornton Alamo film, that's where they kind of highlight that play that he sits in and views. He goes out on the lecture circuit. He has his own almanac produced that shows him as the backwoodsman with the coonskin cap that we know and love today. All of those stories that come out in the 50s with the Disney films kind of get their start by Davy himself during this time period. And so he gets himself reelected in the Whig Party for his 3rd term. He goes back in, and then, of course, he wrangles with Jackson again and again. And when he's up for a 4th term in 1835, they have him removed once again from office. At which point, he is fed up dealing with his constituents that had been opposed to him. He's fed up with Jackson. He's fed up with all these cronies that got him out of office. And as he famously states, and we have the bumper sticker downstairs in our glass display case, he said to them, they may all go to hell, I'm going to go to Texas. And so he leaves his wife and his two of his children behind. Most of the rest had married and settled in Tennessee. And he heads out to Texas. He is supportive of their cause of independence, especially the native Mexicans who are fighting for independence against Santa Anna and his centralized form of government. And he's only out there for a few months when unfortunately he loses his life at the Alamo with the other 200 some odd, and I've heard the range between 186 and 270 versus the 5,000 who were under Santa Anna's leadership after a 13-day siege. Davy died a few months shy of his 50th birthday, so between the birthplace and here we have him for roughly about half of his life here in East Tennessee, and that's the reason why we built this museum, as a tribute and honor for his sacrifice at the Alamo and helping pioneer his way through here and the others who made us the state we are today. A weasel. This one, if you've heard the song Pop Goes the Weasel, this is a weasel. And as I tell people, you're not shooting an actual weasel, you're not blowing up a weasel. Here's your weasel that pops because you wind the threads or your yarn around it. It's a counting device for that. The measurement is set inside the box, and then as you start to wind it around after you've spun it, of course, here on your hand spinning wheel, as you get toward the end of it, and right now it's clicking, so it's been flirting with me, it might pop. The center here will click really loud, and then you know you have a precise amount that you need. So as I tell people, that's where you get the pop goes the weasel. Just don't ask me where the monkey and the mulberry bush factor in. I have no clue. I just know here's your weasel that pops. Now, the other thing that I point out too, we'll talk about the bed, and there's the famous slogan that goes with this type of bed. So if you know, sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Here's why. This is a trundle bed. The bottom here will slide out. That's a perfect spot for that litany of children that you have. You pack them in like little sardines on the bottom while mom and dad are sleeping at the top. Now over time, of course, due to the support for these mattresses, which in this case was, we have a double mattress on top. It's feather supported by straw, which is typical for that style of mattress. The support for both of these is this woven rope system. So over time, due to usage or humidity, the ropes will start to sag and you'll start to sink down toward the bottom. So to get them back properly tightened, you use this tool called a bed winch or a bed wrench or simply a winch. Later models would have the winch on the outside of the bed for winding and tightening the ropes, but you start head to foot going in between these rope slats, pulling and tightening all of them, going the same side and tightening head to foot all the way down, and you tie a new knot. Now this is a cross weave, so you got to go down to the foot of the bed, pulling and tightening all of those, tie another knot, and now you're sleeping tight for the night. Now the bed bugs, of course, comes from the mattress filler. So I already mentioned feather and straw. You might have corn shuck. You might be further south, have some Spanish moss, maybe some chaff of wheat. Whatever you harvested, collected, that's your mattress filler. Along with that, you get fleas, ticks, lice, mites, anything else that crawls in, makes a home, and bites you in the middle of the night while you sleep. So the next time you tuck somebody in and say, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite, appreciate your ancestors that had to worry about both of these things on a daily basis. Gun that I'm holding up, here we go, and I'll pass it around in just a minute. They're about 15-20 pounds. This is a flintlock rifle, and based off of the gunsmith here, it dates somewhere between 1800 to about 1830. It gets its name, of course, from the piece of flint here at the top that once you pull the trigger after you pack it with black gunpowder and a round musket ball, the piece of flint will come down, hit what's known as the striker plate, and produce a spark which ignites the black gunpowder. The accuracy of this is about 150 to 200 yards. It is not a very accurate weapon. It's more for close-up hunting, combat, especially if you're using it in war. So that's your range. And reload time on this gun is somewhere between 2 to 3 rounds per minute, most typically about 3 rounds per minute. And if you're Davy Crockett, you could probably get it up the full range of 200 yards and 2 rounds a minute. He was pretty skilled. Now, I will pass this one around.
Is that from?
Go ahead.
Is that from 1760s to 1860s?
Yes, this is your Revolutionary War through Civil War rifle. And for women, We would have to know how to use one of those too, along with the men. So when our men folk are gone, this is our line of defense too. So we can't just call the police. We are our own policemen.
For the museum?
For the museum, currently this would be several $1,000s in today's money. This, due to the ornamentation and the brass workings on the gun, you're talking in their time frame, this would be about close to an annual salary for a person, or about half of a working man's salary. Now the Ramrod and Mission in Washington, D.C., and it was his attempt there with the autobiography and other tools to get himself reelected. So showing him as the backwoodsman, outdoorsman that we know today.
Heading up the steps. So that would have been the children's area. I can see why. Low ceiling. And this area up here would have housed the guests.
Or in off season, the family would have lived up here. But there would have been 2 to 3 grown men in each of these beds.
Yeah, in each bed, and then some on the floor yet.
And then the family would have chose to sleep outside because they were getting paid to have people stay here.
Yep. And the more people that stayed, the more money. So really cool. I know you're enjoying yourself so far.
You know I'm enjoying myself. Wow.
Now we get to go down in the basement. Got these old Crocs.
I keep it with me too. Usually have some of them photographed or whatever for the day.
And in the basement. Here's the Davy Crockett Little Golden Book.
Yeah. Would Davy been affiliated, or even his dad Joe been affiliated with Base Jugs? Or that more moonshine era?
I wouldn't put it past them. And the only reason why I say it is because of their receipt for the wine. And we mentioned earlier about the dandelion wine.
There's an original copy of the 1834 edition of Davy Crockett's autobiography.
Whatever you harvested and collected and could make with your wine or whiskey, corn, that was very precious. Oh,
They would want to scare
yeah,
and then she'd serve it.
yeah, exactly.
Away from it.
Exactly. And that usually was a part of the contract too, that they could not imbibe while they were working, unless specifically allowed to do so, who they were contracted by. Yep, I've seen that clause in there. That's just some examples there of some of the crops and jugs, not just for liquor, but also
An early foot warmer.
other things that they would store, for goods and.
Well, the wide mouth for cabbage, the
Yes,
ferment.
that's what I was thinking too, except for a few things, date from the mid 1800s to early 1900s. The exceptions to that, of course, is the items on the top left shelf there. That's from our centennial when we went with the Crockett.
In the
50s? Yeah, 1955. And that was sort of the emphasis for why we started the construction and the dedication of the museum that we have today. That sort of, as we say, spurred the momentum to get it going. And then the items on the second shelf there to the left, that's from various Crockett family reunions. We actually had a reunion of Davy's direct descendants here on site last year. About over 60 of them showed up. So it was really nice to see them all present there. And This is a swing churn. This I call the Keurig butter churns because it cuts the time down from the traditional dash churn to about 30 minutes.
This goes back and forth.
Yeah, it goes back and forth, and then the cream will move in a oval pattern and kind of produce butter much faster. So as a result, all you gotta do is sit here and rock.
And you'll hit the ball will be floating around and the buttermilk separated.
And you'll hear it. You will hear it. So this dates right around the 1870, 1880 time period. So this is
I
a.
think I would have preferred this one.
Oh yeah, I
For
do
sure.
too. Saves wear and tear on the arm. That's for sure. Now we have a variety of farming tools. This is a grain thrasher or a grain cradle. So it's a combo with the scythe blade and the rake for raking your hay and cutting it at the same time. And then we have a rope making machine here. So the rope pattern, the braid would be created in the back. This would be stretched out in the front there for several feet to keep the rope braid nice and taut as you start to wind it around that bottom spool. And then you would remove that spool as one gets full and then start another one up. Behind me is a large bellow for the big fires that the blacksmiths might have. And then you can imagine what size fire you've got to be having for a bellow this big. And then there's a couple other items here I want to point out. We have some meat grinders over here. And as I say, if you couldn't buy one or you weren't closely associated with somebody who could manufacture one, this one over here on the end is a homemade meat grinder. So there you go. It does the same purpose and will work the same as the other two that are made out of
Never
metal.
seen a homemade meat grinder.
So there you go. So they've done it themselves. The picture of the ladies here that are riding these side saddles. This is a double side saddle, so you got preference here. You can ride
Left-handed or right-handed?
left-handed, right-handed, whichever way you want to go. This is the traditional men's saddle over here, but this is the more traditional side saddle that you're probably more familiar with just one side. And then the picture over here that we have of the ladies, they are actually riding on these side saddles that we see pictured here. So they're actually can still be put on a horse and you ride out there and maintain that ladylike dignity at all times. And personally for me, just knowing how I'd be and probably fall off, I take my chance and be called the hussy by riding the one leg on the other side like a man. What I want to point out is this is a seedling planter box. So as you plant your rows, you would drop this in every few feet and then drop a little seedling. Saves the wear and tear on the back. And then the mallet that we have here came to us from somebody that got it from an old circus dating right around the early 1900s. The outer base of this is wood to soften the blow. The inner core is metal. So on a farm, you would use this for knocking in fence posts, maybe knocking out a stump out of the ground. It's sort of like today's sledgehammer. It's the all-in-one custom tool. It weighs somewhere right around 20 to 25 pounds.
Okay.
And if you want a woman's equivalent of it, it's the irons that are back here. The traditional one for clothing is the smaller triangular shaped one. That's about 5-6 pounds, pretty doable. But the larger one there, taller, slender one, that is about close to 25-30 pounds. And it is used for your tablecloths, your linens, your bedspreads. Personally for me, I use the smaller one, take forever, or just leave it on the line and let it hang dry rather than use this thing. And if anybody wants to make a comment about wrinkles in my items, they can gladly grab one of those out and iron away, as they would say. Here, based off of its original owner, dates somewhere right around the 1795-1800 time period. The original owner's name was Christian Bible, and he used this wagon to haul his family and all his goods into this area. So it is a Conestoga style wagon, fully loaded. This holds about 2 tons. So you are traveling about 2 to 3 miles an hour on a good day if all the conditions are favorable. So this is your early form of transportation for your goods and services. I akin it to today's U-Haul Mack truck. It was sort of the U-Haul of its day.
Did you have an extra wagon wheel
Yes.
on it somewhere?
Yes, you would keep an extra wheel. You might keep an extra axle, a tongue, because you are also the repairman as well. So if this breaks down, you better hope you have something to repair, or else Providence just led you to that point and you settle. And there's a lot of people I'm sure would be like, okay, we're stuck, we might as well just pitch a tent, make a lean-to, and this is home for the time being. Left, that came from the flooded gristmill accident that happened to Davy and his family when he was about 5-6 years of age. So you're talking about a little over a 230-year-old gristmill stone.
Wow.
And it is literally the stepping stone for why they came to Morristown. Because had they succeeded, who knows? We may never have heard of Davy Crockett. They might have all stayed near the North Carolina border and made a good go out of it. But later on, the Crockett descendants gave us the one that you see right there for us to have at the museum. And if you want a demonstration of how they are positioned and how a gristmill works, that is the picture there on the pole. And it shows from the hopper at the top with the gristmill stones below. And all of those are turned by that water wheel, turning the turbines to keep that wheels grinding away, as they would say. We had a group of women here from the same family, the Doughertys, that had a weaving loom operation for several generations. And so this came from that operation that they had, last officially used right around the 1930s time period, other than a few modern demonstrations.
These
here.
are true patterns.
Yes, exactly. And so all of your materials for making your cloth, your threads would come from natural sources, including animals like your sheep, plant fibers such as hemp, flax, and that's actually where you get your linen thread. This is linen thread, so this comes from the flax plant. And the flax loom for spinning this is that smaller loom that's by the window there. So you do not use a traditional spinning wheel for your flax.
Would you harvest flax from this area?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's actually what it looks like growing. This is actually some dried flax over here. So to make your flax into linen, it's actually right around a 9-step, 10-step process. And I'll give you that. And this shows you just the cutaway of how lengthy a process it is to get it from the flax plant to the finished product, which is your linen thread. And that's the reason why it was so expensive. So if you can imagine your fancy linens, yeah, you got to do a lot of work to get to that fancy linen. And they used to combine this too with some wool, and they called the cloth linsey woolsey.
Oh.
So, and these are some original hand woven pieces behind the glass using a weaving loom like this, and 2 hand sewn quilts. So women would gather in those quilting bees and then kind of talk about what was going on, and then they would share the finished product with a family member, maybe somebody getting married or having a baby, give them a finished quilt. Work for men and women would start pre-dawn hours all the way through to well past the evening. If it's a full moon, you continued and worked outside in your fields using the moonlight to guide your way. Average life expectancy for both men and women at this time period is right around 45. I am 45, almost 46, so I'm in my twilight years if I'm in Davy's time period.
And we're already dead.
Yeah, I was going to say, anybody that makes it past that point, if you've seen those pictures of the elderly and they look like, as I say, the Granny Clampett on a good
Yeah.
day, as I say, if you survive the mortality rates, the hard work, childbearing.
The sun outside all the time?
Exactly. And make it through all that, you've got every right to look how you want to in your photographs when you're older. I'm like, have at it.
Of course, you got to have the coonskin caps.
I'll put that. Thank you.
They actually have his autobiography, The Ballad of Davy Crockett. So that's cool. We can get one of these
Yeah.
old Betsy rifles and hang it above the fireplace. Okay. Little animal masks.
And the model that we have over here too, this was given to us by Davy's direct descendants to show what the tavern would look like back in Davy's time period.
Wow.
Rewired.
Beautiful.
So they gave us that out, and after their reunion last year, and then our caretaker here took the time to get some of the main pieces glued on it, so now we can take it out to schools or other places and let kids enjoy it, now adults as well. The kid in heart, as we'll put it that way.
That's really cool.
Wow.
So, what?
Wow.
So, what did you think? What did you think?
So much fun. So much history. So exciting. Our
Yeah.
guide, Christina, had so much to say about everything from Davy Crockett's childhood. And the thing that I took away from it was that his parents sold him into indentured servanthood.
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember hearing that anywhere
Nope.
along the history trail.
No, good job, high school and elementary school that I went to.
But that's because he didn't stay in school.
Who didn't? I did. So I graduated. But I
I was talking about Davy.
oh yeah, he didn't. He was smart.
But there's so much more that we took away from visiting this museum today.
Yeah.
The Tavern of John Crockett.
Yeah. Now, and not to get political, but he was a Democrat and then, walked away from that for various reasons. There's like nothing's changed. Nothing since the 1800s. It's like, it's still the same story. Still the same criminal politicians, still the same everything. Thankfully,
Davy Crockett
there's a few people that
stood apart
up. Yep.
and separated himself from that at that time with Andrew Jackson, and set off to Texas, and the story continues at the Alamo, and so he was a hero, and that's what we take away from the stories that we've heard as growing up on the Disney, from Disney.
Yeah.
But there too, we learned that none of that was mostly fluff.
Right.
Which we understand. But the truth happens when you come to the museum, you see the artifacts
The truth
up
set
close,
you free.
and there's his own documented biography.
Yeah. So, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And I hope you had as much fun going around it with us as we
We were
had.
very excited, yeah. Had a great time.
Until next time,
Have a
Steph-N-Lee
Steph-N-Lee
day.